Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning to everyone who's here. My name is Mariam, a research analyst of Institute Masa Depan Malaysia, MASA, and I will be your MC for today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to MASA's webinar on the Post-Budget 2023 talk, What's Substantive? We would like to thank everyone for joining in this event today. We are honored to have Yang Berbahagia Professor Dr. Jamal Othman, Honorary Fellow at MASA, as our distinguished speaker, and also accompanied by Yang Berbahagia, also Professor Dr. Geoffrey Williams, Professor at Malaysia University of Science and Technology today, to share their experience and expertise, particularly in the dissection of Budget 2023. Now, before we proceed with today's events, please allow me to begin with short ground rules. Today's webinar is being recorded, so please do ensure that your mic is muted throughout the webinar to avoid any unnecessary background noise. For your information, we are also going live on Facebook, where you may review the whole session after the event is complete. All guest participants are kindly required to rename their Zoom display with their name, _institution. We also highly encourage and invite your comments and questions. Please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a questions for the speaker at any point, just type in there and the moderator will pose it to our speaker at the end of the discussion, subject to time and availability. You're also allowed to unmute your mic during the Q&A session by raising your hand, and our team will kindly assist you. So, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Malaysia has faced numerous economic challenges on the domestic and international front, with more coming on the horizon, with the World Bank anticipating a 2023 recession that will cause a 0.5% slowdown in the global GDP growth. Driven by three aspects: responsive, responsible, and reformist, the recently tabled Budget 2023 includes provisions for a lot of community, women, teenagers, children, the B40 group, Orang Asli community, and even the disabled, keeping with the philosophy of leaving no one behind. However, we're seeing the general election as well as the mentioned economic recession around the corner. The government must be proactive, pragmatic, and responsive to ensure the well-being of the Rakyat. Hence, this webinar will discuss the recently tabled budget from an economic standpoint and look at the substantive issues and challenges that need to be overcome to improve both the quality of life and the viability of the economy. Moving on, it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed moderator and speaker for today. Allow me to start with Professor Dr. Geoffrey Williams, who is a graduate of Cambridge University in Economics. He is currently a Provost for Research and Innovation, Professor and Dean of the Institute of Postgraduate Studies at Malaysia University Science and Technology. He has also held academic positions at the London Business School, Pembroke College, University of Oxford, and the University of London. He as well is a member of the Industrial Advisory Board at the University of London's Health Academy program, and recently appointed as a Senior Fellow at the Malaysian Institute of Economic Research. Now, joining us today as the main speaker is Professor Dr. Jamal Othman, who obtained his doctoral degree in Agriculture and Applied Economics from the University of Georgia, USA. He was a professor of economics at University Kebangsaan Malaysia and currently an honorary fellow at our Institute MASA. He was appointed as the chairman of the National Professors Council Committee on Cost of Living, member of the National Key Economic Area Committee for Water under the Academy of Science Malaysia, economist for the Asian Development Bank and the United Nations Development Programme Economic Planning Unit Project on Economics of Climate Change. Dr. Jamal has produced over 150 journal articles and 180 seminar proceeding papers on economics, especially in resource and environmental economics, agriculture economics, and economics for sustainable development. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our esteemed moderator for today's webinar, Professor Dr. Geoffrey Williams, to begin with the session. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Let me just check that my mic is on. Yes, it is. Okay, thank you very much, Mariam. And thank you, Institute Masa Depan Malaysia, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to come and meet with Prof. Jamal. Economists always like talking to each other. and it doesn't really matter what our different perspectives might be. That's really what we do all the time. So it is real pleasure to be able to have this discussion today, particularly about the budget, especially because budgets are normally very exciting anyway, particularly to economists. We love budgets, but this one is particularly exciting, not just because of the content, which is very rich for economists to discuss. There's a lot of material there for us to unpick, but also the question that it's a budget that was announced just 3 days before an election was announced. So we will need to discuss the budget also in the context, not just of what it's proposing directly, but also, I hope, in terms of the long-term economic challenges that the economy faces, that Malaysia faces, and whether we will see the same budget retabled, whoever's successful in the election, whether it will be the same one or a different one, and therefore whether this budget actually lays those foundations clearly. So let me just begin by asking you, Prof, to give your overall assessment in broad terms about the budget, and whether you think that it was appropriate, whether it met the aims of being responsive, responsible, and reformist, whether Tengku Zafrul achieved those in your analysis.
First, thank you very much, Professor Dr. Geoffrey. And secondly, of course, my thanks should go to Institute Masa for giving me the chance to be here, to be with all distinguished audience. Well, regarding the question by the moderator, my overall overview of the budget. First, the way I think as economists, I would look at the in things first. So what are the in things that we face here, or that are in front of us? We always talk about green economy. We always talk about sustainability. We talk about resilient economy. We talk about inclusivity, right? We talk about fiscal resiliency, particularly. So these are some of the major in things that are that we are seeing, that we are facing right in front of us. People, not just economists, not just politicians, policymakers, but members of the public, largely, they talk about these in things. And now we are also seeing two major things happening right in front of us. The geopolitical uncertainties, given the war between Russia and Ukraine and proxies, and also the recovery mode that we are seeing after the pandemic, after the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are two major events, and along with the in things, I would see the three agendas, the three themes on responsive budget, responsible budget, as well as reformist budget, with the various strategies, with the various focuses. I think to a large extent, they are really being meant for, being designed well to address the in things that I mentioned earlier. So to a large extent, I could see that they are comprehensive enough, broad enough, perhaps the broadest budget that I've seen so far, which is, the one just presented. But as Prof. Geoffrey was saying, we are not sure whether this budget is going to be implemented given the political uncertainties. It may proceed, it may be I don't know, we may see a new budget depending on the outcome of the election. But so far as the question is concerned, to a large extent, I see the ingredients, the various focuses, the various strategies supporting the three agendas. They're very much consistent they're very much in line with the instincts and particularly the gist of our latest Malaysia plan, RM12 or MP12, which is largely about sustainability, inclusivity, the green economy. Of course, we still want to see growth. I think that's my take so far. Prof. Jeffrey.
So what about the size of the budget? Because of course, one of the first things that Tengku Zafrul said, and he was smiling and very happy to be able to say, this is the biggest ever budget, 372 billion ringgit. And I remember when I was watching it, I looked at that. I expected the budget to be a little bit higher, but when it was said 372 billion, I checked on 3 separate sources to make sure that they got the number right on RTM. I was watching on RTM, and I was just checking on other places to make sure that they got the number right. So this big number, were you expecting that massive increase in spending? And do you think that it's first whether it's necessary and whether we can find the revenues to deliver that?
Yeah, I mentioned the term, the broadest budget that I've ever seen. That surely includes the size of the budget. It's really substantial, and I think it's about 372 billion. That's the highest, the biggest so far. And indeed, that size I think would be necessary. Would be, I think, also expected, given the given the events, given the developments of the day, because we know that the budget, annual budget, is not just about economics. It also has to do with politics as well. So it's more to the political economics of things, not really the economics of the budget itself. So I think we can expect a large one, a large expansionary budget for next year, regardless of the government of the day, I suppose. And so 372 billion is immense, is substantial as compared to last year was I think about 332 billion, excluding I guess the COVID budget. I think yes, that sum is kind of expected, at least from my viewpoint, an expansionary one. And in order to meet the broad measures, the broad strategies, although they are all in line, consistent with the things that we are facing, it's really immense. It's really something that is very striking to me. And we can see that with that amount, clearly it goes very well to GDP, mainly in the form of consumption, private consumption, and public consumption as well. So GDP growth will be assured, I guess. At least it will meet our expectation of some 4 to 5%. Yeah.
Yes. So you see the increase, as you mentioned, is about 40 billion, from about 332 billion to 372 billion. And it appears to have been split, since you're talking about government consumption and government investment and private consumption and so on. And it appears to be split rather evenly. So about 20 billion has gone to raise government development expenditures from 75 billion roughly to 95 billion. And that means that 20 billion has been retained in terms of government spending to be distributed across the broad portfolio of new projects and existing projects. So do you think that split between operational expenditure, or what we often call government consumption, and development expenditure, what we often call public investment, do you think that split is about right in terms of the 40 billion?
I think, development is up by, I think, some 25 billion. And this is good, because in a year you have that kind of major increases in development expenditure, because this is something new. When we talk about development, it's always about new things, new activities, new projects, new initiatives. While operating, they are mainly routine. It doesn't add to any any new initiatives. It's mainly to maintain what we already have. So I guess in terms of that, I just look at the marginal change in development expenditure alone, which is I think some 25 billion, which is very major. I think I'm more concerned with that. Yeah. While the routines, the emoluments, for example, the operating expenditure, they are largely meant to maintain what we already have. So it doesn't add to any new welfare there. It doesn't add to new well-being. But it's only the development expenditure increases that would add to the formation of new well-being, or layman term is just new projects, new activities.
Another thing that didn't really change much in the budget is the borrowing, because the increase in government operational expenditures was almost matched directly by the projected increase in revenues, which meant that actually the amount of borrowing stayed, broadly speaking, about the same. Given what we all know, and also what you've said about the difficulties in the global environment and the global economy and so on, and the growth forecast, do you think that the projection for revenues is realistic? And what will happen, let's say, if there is a much sharper downturn in terms of the revenue collection?
That's a hard question. It links to many related issues affecting government revenue. First, I think there was a mention that tax revenue, tax base, or revenue coming from taxes may increase. It seems that the government is quite confident to see some increases in tax revenue, and but non-tax perhaps may be quite stagnant or may rather decline as I read it. And also expected contribution, say payments from our national oil company, Petronas, and other GLCs may be expected to increase. But I think the major GLCs, especially our national oil company, is very much contingent on global factors. So there is an element of risk there, except that we go for some major reforms in our taxation policy. But seems that I did not see some major reforms in our fiscal policy, particularly in terms of government revenue sources. We still go at the same business as usual mode. In fact, we have been quite lenient, more lenient this time in terms of offering some, I would say, quite substantial tax rate deduction to the taxable income, I think by some 2 percentage points. That's really a major offer. But the point here is that we are quite confident to see some increases in tax revenue, and our major GLCs, especially our national oil company, is expected to help more next year, and that is very much contingent to the world economy, to many global factors. And people have been talking about the so-called smart tax, the GST, or close enough or similar to VAT, goods and services tax. And apparently this has not been incorporated in next year's budget. And I think I must say that that was my expectation, to see a major reform in the way we source our government revenue, to see more sense of resilience there, because we know that GST is a smart tax in the way that it's not contingent on the ups and downs of our economy. Consumption will almost stay stable, and therefore very likely the government will obtain stable income from GST, and that can be a really, I would say, the best assurance in terms of being able to sustain our revenue, or in short, our fiscal resiliency, our government revenue resiliency can be assured with GST. But maybe for some reasons that is not in yet.
What do you think those reasons are? Because I think many people have been discussing this debate. I mean, we've all been involved in this debate on GST. And I guess that many people were hoping to see more, in, as you mentioned, in terms of tax reform and a discussion on GST, but we didn't. So do you think that was a political issue, or do you think that the government genuinely hasn't made a decision on GST? And will we see it at any time in the future?
I think, I believe, it's my personal conviction that it is a political issue. In fact, when GST was removed way back in 2018, it was really out of political motive, not really economic. I must say that I'm an economist. I teach GST, part of it in my class. So GST is smart tax. Almost the whole world is on GST. We can go alone, right? Looking at other avenues, although we could, but I think we are not part of the mainstream economics here in terms of taxation. So yeah, it's really due to political consideration. And one thing, last time, the first time we implemented this, I think much of the benefits out of the GST, particularly the non-economics benefit in the form of behavioral change, has not really been advocated substantially. The behavioral change among consumers with GST, I believe it would lead to to smart consumerism, for example, smart consumption. It would lead to a stronger DIY, do-it-yourself industry. It would lead to standardization in many aspects of consumer goods, so that DIY will flourish, do-it-yourself industry will flourish. That can only come. That can only be accelerated by or via GST, not the current prevailing taxation regime, which we does not show explicitly how much we are paying for tax. We may even pay more for our purchase for SST, but we don't see that being apparent on the tax. So behavioral change is something that has not been adequately advocated when we were trying to introduce GST in the first time, way back. I think that was too faulty.
Yes, I mean, I think as economists, we understand this in those terms. We understand first the efficiency of the tax, and then the tax collection possibilities. And then also, as you mentioned, the behavioral issues. Is it going to change consumer behavior or company behavior? And these are issues which are fascinating to all of us. And I think this is very much why this debate about GST or SST, or even something called a harmonized SST, which is a variant of the SST. Do you think we're going to have that debate? This is what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think
will we actually sit down as economists and say to the government, look, you have to at some point, you have to grapple with this, perhaps not in a budget, but after the budget?
I think we want to be populist. We can understand that. But when it comes to sourcing our revenue, it must be really follow best practices. So GST is one of them. And we really need to advocate that nicely, tactfully, and comprehensively. All aspects of benefits, including behavioral change, shall need to be espoused. And this has not been done yet. And I believe also the importance of, for example, having a referendum. We ask the people to come to help the government, show their opinions, show their preference. Which one you want? A resilient government revenue? With that, we should be able to assure paying some 1.7 million government servants, civil servants,
Mm-hmm.
and largely of them are Malays, Bumiputra. So this, I think, this will be, it will be there for a long time, and for that matter, the fiscal resiliency is crucial. So I think a referendum may help.
Well, I think that's a very interesting proposition, that we should have much more involvement of stakeholders in determining economic policy, and asking which type of taxation do you want, for example, or which type of spending priorities, if not the details of it, then certainly the spending. And this points to having a much more inclusive approach to budgeting and spending. And this is one of the questions in the Q&A from Ibrahim Abu Ahmed. And it's also one of the points that I think we can very usefully discuss, which is a question about inclusivity in the budget. Yes.
With
and
GST easily, we can see some 20 billion additional income coming from GST.
Yes, and the question of inclusivity in terms of the scope of the budget spending and the projects within the budget. Do you feel that, I mean, there are very many new projects for different groups. For example, there were very many projects for women. There were some new projects for OKU, and there were projects for the SMEs and entrepreneurs. Do you think that the scope of these projects was sufficiently broad for us to make a judgment that this was an inclusive budget?
Not entirely fulfilling the scope, though, I must say that. But I think to a large extent, it's consistent with the themes. It's consistent. It's correct in terms of consistency. But in terms of meeting the full scope, I would say there are many still missing. The major ones, not little ones, but major ones are still missing there. Perhaps it's meant for in the coming years, but I think in light of the current development, like food security, I think not quite inadequate treatment of how we treat food security, and some other things like saying homegrown technology development is still quite lacking, and the urgency to see less reliance on foreign workers. I also see that there are some measures, but it's still lacking, and perhaps that will be left to the coming years budget. So while they are consistent with the themes in terms of inclusivity, I think there are some areas where somehow we still miss them quite apparently.
I think that you hit you really hit one of the key areas that was missed, and that's particularly because of the problems we have had recently, which is food security, the question of food security. So we clearly have had a crisis particularly in terms of chicken. We had, I call it the chicken Armageddon. So when you go into KFC and they literally don't have any chicken, there's some sort of crisis. Some crisis is going on there. How do you think that the government might have, or what do you think the government might have been able to do to address those problems? Because your background is in agricultural economics. Yes. Yeah. I mean, do you see that structural reform in the agricultural industry, but also through the supply chain in the processing plants and the distribution plants, and as well all the way down to the retailers, do you see that there was some reform opportunities that were missed in the budget? Yeah,
I guess we need to talk a little bit about the bigger picture first, with respect to food security and food sovereignty as well. First, we have understood food security quite, I would say we need to review the way we understand food security in the first place. And I think many years back, we used to think that food security always relates to the way we are able to grow some 70% of our staple food, which is mainly rice, and all others may be kind of bonus, but our focus has been on rice to grow at least 70% of our rice needs. So in the first place, the dimension, the scope of food that comes under that concern under food security domain may need to be reviewed. It may not just be just rice, but certainly a couple of other crops can be included as staple food as well. Just like in Indonesia, their staple food is not just about rice, but there are many other crops that under the so-called category of staple food, and therefore that will be under the charge of the food security policy. And another thing is food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is not just about food security, being able to source food supplies at the right time, at the right price, but food sovereignty is more than that. It's being able to grow ourselves, our food needs. Just like what Singapore is doing. It's consistent with sovereignty. It's about being able to grow our food requirement regardless of the economic cost. We may not have a cost advantage if compared to imported ones. Imported ones may be a lot cheaper. The same with rice. Imported rice is a lot cheaper, but yet we still wanted to grow 70% of our rice needs, right? So food sovereignty is a lot more than food security. Is about growing our own food. Of course, not all, but some of them that may be subject to some intellectual deliberation or academic deliberation. So we need to have that kind of thinking beyond food security, includes food sovereignty. And for that matter, when you talk about supply chain in the context of our agriculture, we know that our agriculture is very unique. It's the most unique type of agricultural economy in the world, I must say that, where some 90% of our agricultural land goes to these industrial crops, not food crops. Although some aspects of palm oil is food, is edible, but largely more than 90% of our agricultural land goes to rubber and oil palm plantation. We are actually feeding the world, not just feeding ourselves, like rubber and a large part of palm oil products. They are meant for global markets. So, and our agriculture institution, which were mainly established in the early 70s, that was many, many years ago. I was still at the university then. They were still modeled, they were still based on the colonial agricultural or economic model, mainly perennial crop based. And therefore, until now, even for the Pertubuhan Plant and Kawasan Area Farmers Organization, I think it has like close to 1 million farmers as members. There are more than 260 area farmers organizations. To a large extent, they are focusing on industrial crops, not food crops. So we need to review these entire agricultural institutions and see whether or not they are at par with the needs that we are facing now, particularly with respect to food security and food sovereignty. So far, there's no mention about the need to look at reforms in the way our agricultural institutions, which have been established for so long a time, have changed, whether or not they have been effective given the new developments, whether or not they have been engaging the farmers, the producer groups, and the various entities along the entire supply chain. Much is unknown, but I would personally think that the budget should give some allocation for studies, although a little allocation, but some allocation, albeit, are needed in order to look at the various agricultural institutions with respect to our entire supply chain affecting agriculture. Mainly, this affects the plantation industry as well as MAFI, the Agricultural Ministry.
Yes, I agree, and I can see that is a big gap food security didn't appear to be addressed at all. Perhaps we will discuss that a little bit later in the Q&A. But do you see any other issues and challenges that were not there in the budget or were not addressed by the budget?
Yeah, government procurement. Yeah, much has been talked about government procurement, but have we seen any substantial change in our government procurement policy, particularly in light of spurring our green economy, spurring ESG? So government policy needs to be reformed as well to be in line with what we wanted under the green economy. As far as sustainability is concerned, then it has to do with the green economy in the end. And our government procurement, which is quite substantial every year, must be geared towards that. Take, for example, the procurement of technology. Normally, our policymakers would like to see, the world best state-of-the-art technology or apps. And that would take time, right? If we wanted to see, a homegrown apps or technology, that would take time, maybe more than a year. If the government wanted to see now, to see it being delivered now, and then our people, our vendors will be forced to source it elsewhere from outside. They wouldn't have enough time to build homegrown technology within a short period. So we must give some leeway to our people, to our expertise, to our industries, to home grow their own technology. Even though for the first year it might not be as good as expected by our policymakers, but give them time. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, I think we will see a lot of improvement with that.
You see, on this issue of technology, I think if we look at the experience during the lockdowns, Malaysia actually demonstrated its capacity to produce very high quality technology very quickly. Don't you think? Because we had the My Sejahtera app, and then we had the COVID Now online database and dashboards. And to me, that showed very quickly that Malaysians are really very, very good at this. It may not be the design of hardware or software, but certainly the design of apps, dashboards, data usage, all of this sort of thing, that happened very, very, very quickly and very successfully. And when you look at it, and the interaction was very, very high quality. So do you think that that type of thing is something the government really is underestimating? I mean, I agree with you, the question of
sadly,
not enough homegrown
I agree to a
R&D.
large extent with you, Prof. Jeffrey, that policymakers need to understand, need to embrace what we have, our own local expertise. We do have to a large extent, maybe not all, but to a large extent, we can have capacity to offer, to deliver what is wanted by our users, by our policymakers in particular. Not all though, but for some of them, even for some of the apps, some of the softwares or technologies, we could produce them ourselves. I'm very sure, but it needs more time as compared to some other technologies or some other apps. So depending on the rigor, depending on the use, depending on the sector where the technology is being applied. So to a large extent, we do have the capacity. Never undermine our own people. So we are seeing, for example, many projects, being given to foreign consultants, but in the end, they came back to us. They outsourced to local consultants, to local expertise to deliver. So this is very important, a new mindset to our policymakers to see that we do have the capacity to do things.
Yes, because I mean, even before the lockdowns, we have to remember that Grab, e-hailing is a locally developed technology.
Yes.
And also during the lockdowns, when we, you had the closure of international flights, Tony Fernandez and AirAsia had to pivot very quickly into something else. And he set up a much, he calls it a super app, and a very broadly based app. And he managed to do that very, very quickly. So it appears to me that there is a huge amount of potential, actually, and often we underestimate it. Perhaps we focus a little bit too much on hardware or chip technology or this type, which you quite rightly say takes quite a long time. And we focus less on the things that Malaysians are actually very, very good at, which is creativity, coding, creating interactive, useful apps for everyday activities. I mean, everything, just getting food, for example, getting food and shopping online, and all of these things exploded, didn't they, during this time? And they happened very, very quickly. Can I just move on to something else which I felt was missing, and I want to see if you agree. And that's pensions. Because during the lockdown, as we know, we had massive withdrawals from EPF. The total withdrawals are 155 billion, involving the direct withdrawals and then the reduction in the contributions. The direct withdrawals are about 145 billion, and the reduction in the contributions is about 10 billion. So the total is about 155 billion. And as we know from EPF data, there are millions of people who are without any pension cover. And we didn't see anything at all about that. Nothing, apart from the civil service pensions. We saw for the civil service pensions, but we didn't see anything at all to address that pensions issue. Do you think that that's something that the government should be looking at urgently?
You mean the EPF thing? Yeah.
Well, the replacement. I mean, what the issue for the EPF is the question about the replacement of the because of the withdrawals. Very many people are now without any real pension savings, and I didn't see that Tengku Zafrul even mentioned that as a problem. He didn't even recognize that, or he didn't appear to recognize that as a problem. And certainly there were no particular policies in the budget to help people to deal with that. Apart from, there was one which was increasing the upper limit on EPF contributions from 60,000 to 100,000 a year, but no tax incentive to do that, by the way. But I'm just wondering whether you think that is a...
Okay. I read somewhere here, I recall that there was a net contribution, a negative net contribution to our provident fund in 2021, right? I think it was like the negative 50 billion. I think that was the figure, and I was quite amazed to see that EPF finally could still offer, good dividends. They could still perform quite well, although with the negative net contribution in 2021, I think for the first time in many years, I think in 20 years, for the first time in 20 years, there was a net negative contribution. But having faced that, EPF could still do well. But nevertheless, I agree with you that there should be some measures, some incentive to employers to help replace at least partially those withdrawn funds in order for the well-being of their future. And apparently it's quite missing. Then I'm not very sure if I've seen that such explicit measure on trying to replace or at least partially the withdrawn funds, which would affect their future consumption, because we know the EPF is meant for future consumption, basically.
Because this relates to one of the questions that we have from one of the participants, which is more broad than that, which is it's about welfare in general. Do you feel that there was enough in the budget to help safeguard people's well-being more broadly, not just in pensions, but in other aspects, perhaps their income level or people in particularly vulnerable groups? In other words, there's a 42 billion allocation for subsidies. Do you think that's the right amount and the right way to deal with it, or is there a better way to deal with welfare than that?
First, the Bantuan Keluarga Malaysia, I think that has been very comprehensive. It covers the M40 as well, and there have been many initiatives there under Bantuan Keluarga Malaysia, but largely they are cash transfers. I think that has been rather comprehensive, very much consistent with the theme of the budget. But in terms of social security, in terms of safety nets, so I think is going on quite well. I think there have been some improvement with so. But what I'm saying here is social security in the sense of providing some buffer for the vulnerable groups, particularly in times of macroeconomic crisis. I'm not sure whether I've seen such funds being allocated for such eventualities. Remember during our 97-98 ASEAN financial crisis, there was a huge outcry on the need for social security. Although the government of the day then was not really responsive to that, because it reflects a sense of weakness on the part of the government. But I think it's high time that we look into that. Social security, a kind of contingency fund meant to have the vulnerable groups in times of macroeconomic instability. And that's yet to be defined what's meant by macroeconomic crisis or macroeconomic instability. Is basically about helping the vulnerable groups. For example, those urbanites which may be retrenched due to some economic crisis, they need to go back to rural areas, to their kampungs, and look for jobs. And these are some of the examples of vulnerable groups. And I would think the vulnerable groups are those who are actually urbanites. They are urbanites rather than kampung people, which live basically on subsistence. They grow their own food and whatnot. But the urban people, those people living on the marginal in terms of income, may be most vulnerable to crisis. And this is where a kind of social safety net is crucial. And I'm yet to see that being mentioned in any budget so far, including the current one.
Okay, let's move on. Yes, let's move on to a different topic, which I think you would be the perfect person to help us to understand. The government spent quite a lot of time, or Tengku Zafrul spent quite a lot of time on the issue of sustainability and green growth and various packages to try to improve Malaysia's sustainability performance. And sometimes this was in terms of significant development expenditures on alternative and renewable energy generation. We've had the new energy blueprint, which is pushing very much on renewable energy to reduce reliance on hydrocarbons. And then also something, as you mentioned before, as an economist, which is behavioral change, and to try to encourage behavioral change toward sustainability or more sustainable management processes. Do you think this is a good agenda, and do you think that the government's on the right track in terms of its sustainability agenda, the balance between investments and behavioral change?
Yeah, there's a hard question there. Now, first, when we talk about sustainability, there must be a clear definition as well as a clear measure of sustainability. Once we understood the kind of sustainability that we wanted, then naturally we should develop the measure in order to give a sense of idea and indication whether or not we are moving towards that, whether we are moving towards sustainability or whether we are on the right path towards the green economy, towards including inclusive development. First of all, we haven't got that measure yet, and we have been relying on GDP. GDP, although was very helpful, very useful to measure the size of an economy, we know that, but it was not designed at all to measure true progress, to measure sustainability. And apparently we have used that as a good proxy for, for sustainability, for true progress, which is actually very flawed, very deceptive, I must say that. So we need to have the right measure, and we haven't got that yet. And another thing is on the behavioral change. Behavioral change towards a well-behaved attitude with regards to the use of natural resources, with regard to the environment, that can only be affected by or via economic instruments, not just moral suasion. While moral suasion is important, but in the end, we need to have hardwire policies in the form of economic instruments like taxes, particularly taxes. We talk about carbon tax. Even in this budget, there's a mention on carbon tax, but it's not very clear yet how that is going to be implemented. We even talk about economic instruments right in our RM7, and now is RM12. Okay, Malaysia Plan 12 compared to Malaysia Plan 7. There was 5 series of Malaysia Plan already. We already talk about the importance of economic instruments in environmental management. Yet until now, we have not seen some adequate demonstration of how that will be implemented. I mean the mechanism of various economic instruments, particularly carbon tax or environmental tax. So as economists, I believe economic instruments, particularly taxation, is one of the best ways in order to affect behavioral change in terms of the way we look at natural resource use as well as the environment in general. And another thing, never disregard the importance of marginal abatement cost approach. We tend to talk about big things. For example, green building is important, no doubt. Green building is important, and mass transportation, green transportation, they are, no doubt important, and we are talking about it. Electric vehicles, yes, important, and the use of green energy generally, the importance of what we call as efficiency improvement, technical efficiency in energy use. But we tend to disregard behavioral change, which is actually, in terms of benefit, it is self-generating. It doesn't require any kind of cost because the benefits are self-generating. It's about the way we say driving behavior, which is almost no abatement cost there. It's about changing our behavior in terms of how we drive our vehicles. And for example, the use of GPS can save a lot of time, looking for the right route to take us to the destination. So that will save a large, to some extent, our energy use and in the end, pollution impacts. It is basically some trivial, so-called trivial approach, driving behavior, which would generate, a large amount of benefits without any explicit abatement costs, and that is somehow being disregarded. Once, yes, and most efficient.
Sorry, yes. I think another area. I mean, what you're saying is absolutely right. We can use economics, we can use tax, and we can use subsidies or spending to try to affect behavioral change. But another very important part of economics is the rule of law, and that is the legal constraints in which the market is conducted. And one of the big issues in terms of environmental performance in Malaysia is that although there is quite a lot in terms of environmental regulation and environmental protection, enforcement is very weak. And if the enforcement were improved actually you wouldn't need so many of these budget items on sustainability, because quite a lot of this behavior would come in terms of what you just said, the hardwiring of the behavioral change, and not through moral suasion, but through active regulation of the market. What do you think about that? Do you think we have enough in terms of regulation, or we're trying to use the budget instruments?
Yeah, I see your point there. I think in economics, we talk about the use of standards.
Yes, standards, exactly, yes. Enforcement of standards, yes.
Measures basically is command and control policies. We talk about the new Environmental Quality Acts, which would add to more stringent measures, I suppose. I've not seen the details yet, but I read about it. And we're also looking at the new, what you call it, ambient quality standards, and that is being currently reviewed. But still, these are all the command and control measures. We set the standards, and we assure that the various economic agents would adhere to the standards. If they fail to observe the standards, we take them to court. We penalize them. This is the standard, the more commonly practice measure in terms of environmental management. But when it comes to real behavioral change, then only economic instrument will be able to affect that, be it individuals, consumers, or the industries themselves. The industry will find ways in order to optimize their costs, production costs, taking into consideration, the cost that they need to pay for the use of the environmental inputs. And from there, in due time, we'll see a well-behaved institution, be it industries or households or individuals. They will react to such economic instruments. We hate paying tax. We hate paying anything. So with tax, we will need to think many times before we affect the way we use our natural resources and affecting the quality of the environment. And we haven't got that yet.
No, I agree.
So for command and control measures, except again, I also agree to a large extent. Yeah, in terms of the way we enforce those command and control measures, particularly the standards of our enforcement, which requires sufficient budget, sufficient resources will be needed for us to enforce adequately the various command and control measures. But open burning, for example, I think we are doing quite okay with respect to open burning. Perhaps the penalty is quite harsh, and that scare many people away. Mm-hmm. And enforcement has been quite okay. We have of what you call it, citizen report, citizen arrest as well. People are reporting, any events of open burning to the various authorities. Yeah.
Yes, I mean there is an increase in activism. All of these, to me, you see, all of these are part of the mix. I mean, I sort of agree with you that we need behavioral change, and there are economic instruments that can deliver that, but they don't do it in isolation. This is my experience. This is my view. So thank you for that.
We need to deliberate more on that.
Okay. We have some questions actually from the audience, and now we've come to about an hour, and we want to sort of move into the Q&A. So thank you to everybody who's put up the questions, and I'm going to try to go through as many of those as I can. But we also have somebody who wants to make a contribution, who is Zaim Aziz. I don't know if you want to switch on your mic and ask us your question, or whether you want to send your question in. But if you're there, Zaim, you can ask us now. If not, then let me, perhaps he's a little bit shy. So let's start the questions, and then when you're ready, Zaim, you can let us know. We have a question from Afiq in Penang. which is about maintenance. He says that there was a lot of maintenance activities that were or routine activities that were announced, including military budgets and things like this. And his question is, given that we might expect there to be a global recession next year, should the government be focusing on routine activities, or should the government be focusing on more, I guess, are the routine and maintenance activities essential, or should the government focus on something else?
Respond, Prof. Geoffrey?
Yeah, what is your take? What is your take on that?
Yeah, in normal situation, when the world is perfectly normal in terms of geopolitical relations, particularly geopolitical conflicts, I guess it may be safe for us to to act or to do things normally, whereby we may not go for a large military budget, particularly the security concern. Well, in times like what we are seeing now, we have been talking about the very low budget for our military for a long time already, and now we're seeing right in front of us the global conflicts which may spread, and close to us, and that is quite worrying. I think given this consideration is like like the issue of balancing the limited resources as well as the needs of the country, particularly strategic interests, and security is certainly a very strategic one. I think I would give support to that, a larger military budget than usual, in light of the developments around. Yeah, of course there are trade-offs, but I think security at this time we should not compromise.
I mean, well, there is a view that government spending, it doesn't really matter what you spend it on, because eventually it finds its way into the economy.
Yeah,
and there's a multiplier effect. So the question is really not so much about, is it wasted if you spend it on one area or another area? Because actually any government money, this is the sort of interventionist or Keynesian approach. Their view is any government money that is directed into the economy through whatever source will eventually find its way into domestic demand, and then that will cause growth.
Yeah, it is government expenditure.
Yes, so but I guess the question is one of priorities, but your view is that actually the defense issue is a priority. Is that right? Yeah,
because for many years the military has been not given enough attention budget-wise, as I see it. So it's high time.
I think certainly that's the feedback, isn't it? Because of the LCS issue, the literal combat ship issue. I think many of the senior military experts have pointed out that this investment is essential because there has been many years of underinvestment. So although we might, it's a question, we call it guns and butter, don't we? That's what economists talk about, which is a choice between one type of spending and another type of spending, guns or butter, guns or food. That's what we say. But I mean, you can't go on not spending on defense forever, otherwise you have no defense at all. Another question from Zoraida, which is sort of similar, and because it relates to the question that Afiq was asking about the impact of the global recession or the potential global recession. How real do you think that is, this issue of the global recession, and what would be the impact on Malaysia? And Zoraida is asking what steps should be the priority of the government given the possibility of the recession. What's your take on that?
In the context of budget, which is very much a tactical plan kind of thing, not a long run planning kind of thing. So I think it has to do with the resiliency of our sources of revenue, government revenue. Again, is about that. Yeah, I mentioned that already. And so far, GST has been still missing. So I would like to see that in coming years, but so far, well, we hope for the best, although, again, reliance on our national oil company for much of the revenue, reliance on SST as well, which is contingent much on the economic growth, and that will be quite risky. There are that element of risky in terms of getting the right amount of government revenue. But nevertheless, we remained a trading nation, maybe a big trader since independence, actually. And that also is going to be much affected by the global economy. But I think some steps like opening up our trade through RCEP, and recently we ratified the CPTPP. And although that's not really part of the domain of the annual budget, but it would help a lot in terms of resiliency of our trade relations with the world. So we continue to be a free trader, and this is actually very important. So that's my take here. So
yes, because yes, I mean, there is this issue of revenue. We mentioned it before, isn't it? And I think you're quite right. The oil royalty from Petronas will be higher this year. Well, actually, it's higher than normal. It's normally about 20 to 25 billion, and 2023 they're expecting about 35 billion. Of course, this year it was 50 billion because they made an additional revenue contribution because of the subsidies issue. Now, the thing is, the oil price has come down quite significantly since the earlier part of the year. In March, something like that, it was up above 130, 140, and now it's hovering in the range of 85 to, I guess, $85 to $95 or something like that, $85 to $100, $80 to $100, something like that. So it has come down quite significantly, and we are seeing both. Well, first, the price of RON 97 has come down very significantly. Not that very many people buy that, but the price has come down. But what that means, of course, is also that the subsidy for RON 95 will be less. And so the overall subsidy budget will have fallen. But one issue that we can see from the budget is that the development expenditures, and this relates to one of the questions, unfortunately, the questions come up as from somebody who, it says an anonymous attendee, so I don't quite know your name, but one of the questions from a member of the audience is, the development expenditures have gone up, as we discussed earlier. They went up quite significantly from about 75 billion to about 95 billion. And that's exactly the amount that is being borrowed by the government. Do you think that there is an implication in terms of having development expenditures equaling the deficit? The 95 billion deficit is almost equal to the 95 billion. It's a little bit more, isn't it? It's 97 billion deficit and 95 billion development expenditures. Do you see that there is an issue there in terms of the stability of the budget?
Yeah, I think as noted in the budget text in the budget speech, I think there was the assumption that tax revenue would increase to some extent, and non-tax revenue might fall a little bit, and dividends, I mentioned already, that might increase substantially. So, well, of course, when you talk about dividends, which is largely coming from our GLCs, namely our national oil company, Petronas, is largely contingent on global factors. So in the end, we may be able to meet largely our intended expenditure, but it may not be financed, to the extent that we have wanted. We may see a larger deficit instead, because
well, you see, another argument is as follows, isn't it? Which is, you shouldn't be using borrowing to finance government consumption or to finance operational expenditures. The operational expenditures should be financed by revenues. And in that respect, that appears to be what the government is doing, because their projected revenue is almost exactly the same as their projected operational expenditures. And then the projected development expenditures is almost exactly the same as the borrowing. And actually, if you looked at it from the perspective of responsible fiscal policy, that would be consistent with a responsible fiscal policy. The other observation to make about that is that development spending should produce growth in the long term. And it is actually long-term growth that will help you to repay the deficit. So if you look at it as an investment, but it is, you might call it well, it is a deficit. You call it a deficit, but if you look at it more as an investment in public infrastructure, which will deliver long-term economic growth, then you might be more persuaded that it will be worthwhile, because the growth generated from that will be repaid in the long run. So you could look at it like that, actually, isn't it? I mean, the way I'm not sure that actually Tengku Zafrul presented it in that way, but when I look at the budget, that's how I look at it.
Because in the case of Malaysia, we don't have the details, the itemized capital expenditure, yes, including capital receipts, unlike some of the countries which would show the details in terms of capital receipts and capital expenditure. That would include the various borrowings from loans, from debts, or from bonds. But we do not show that details. It's all lumped up under development expenditure. So I agree that development is more to the greenfield, more to creating new welfare, new assets or new activities, rather than the operating expenditure, and would lead to future capacity, future economic growth capacity. So even though it will be a deficit, it could be even more, depending on the GDP. If the GDP is not as what we expected, the deficit ratio may actually be higher, because ratio is against GDP, right? Our deficit against GDP. So that depends very much on to what extent we are able to forecast quite closely our GDP performance. But nevertheless, when you talk about the source of development expenditures, you mentioned about loans. I think as long as those loans are from domestic sources, is ringgit denominated, I think we are quite okay. We are quite sure that the money will circulate within the economy. And again, it's good for our, those holders of our bonds. We take the loans from them, and they get the various annual coupons, annual payments from the government. So that's not bad. Yeah. So you also notice, we notice about the large domestic investment that will take place, or expected to take place next year, is largely by our own domestic entities. That shows we have, the resources there. Yes. So it's just a matter of negotiation between the government and their own entities.
Yes, I think that's part of the issue. When people look at the budget, and when they're looking at the exchange rate, and when they're looking at monetary policy, they often forget exactly what you just said, which is that overwhelmingly Malaysian government debt, for example, is held by Malaysians, and particularly the Malaysian financial institutions, the banks, but also especially the government-linked investment corporations and the pension funds. So actually,
it goes back to us eventually.
Yes,
to
exactly.
annual payments, annual corporate payments.
It's a debt that's owed to yourself, in a way. It's a national debt that is owed to the nation, and it's borrowed from the nation largely. And of course, the other issue is that it's almost completely ringgit denominated. So even if interest rates change, there isn't any real question of selling very large amounts of foreign currencies, because the debt is actually mostly in ringgit. And one thing that I found interesting, in comparison, for example, to the budget in United Kingdom, which I was watching, I think just about a week before, 10 days before, it was called a mini budget. It actually wasn't mini at all. It was very, very large, 45 billion pounds. So it was a very big budget. But as the United Kingdom finance minister, we call him the Chancellor of the Exchequer, was making his speech, the financial markets were reacting very, very, very quickly. And they were very angry about it, apparently, because the pound collapsed, and then the interest rates on long-term government securities rose through the roof. But here, when Tengku Zafrul was giving his speech, I was watching the financial market, well, particularly the ringgit exchange rate, and nothing happened. So either that suggests that it was actually quite neutral in terms, the financial markets felt it was quite a neutral budget, well, certainly in terms of the financial market implications, or that they didn't feel it was a relevant budget. Perhaps they were expecting that it wouldn't be implemented. And so perhaps they were waiting to see what will come in the budget that will be implemented after the election. So, I mean, my view was that people often get very concerned about the financial markets, but actually the financial markets were relatively stable, certainly in comparison to what happened in the United Kingdom, for the reasons that you mentioned, Prof, which is the structure of the financial markets is often not fully appreciated by commentators, who somehow feel that there's a big chunk of inflow and outflow that's going to cause a lot of stability. But actually the Malaysian financial markets are very heavily underpinned by Malaysian investors. Isn't that true?
If you look at the technology, which is increasingly more efficient in terms of how funds flow across countries and how people perceive the global economy, that has become much more efficient nowadays. So we can think that the money market, international money market, is becoming more efficient, such that it's always close to near equilibrium all the time, or near efficient all the time, or most of the time.
Yes.
So such that our ringgit will largely, it's my personal thing, my personal view, will largely be contingent on how people perceive the political stability of Malaysia. And this is still uncertain yet. Not really due to trade flows, because we have been gaining a lot of advantage through our ringgit or through our depreciated ringgit, yes, per large extent of our exports, but that apparently does not change much of our exchange rate. But certainly is due to capital flows that will be contingent on the way investors perceive our politics, our good politics. So
yes.
You want to call it that way, how they perceive our good politics. So it will, we will wait, and we will see, a lot of effect coming in terms of the way,
yes,
the way our ringgit will respond to it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's clearly right, because the announcement of the election had a bigger effect on the ringgit exchange rate than the budget itself. So actually, when the election was announced, the ringgit weakened slightly. But it's very difficult to know exactly what is the influence of that, because it's never only the story about Malaysia. It's also a story about, if you're looking at the dollar exchange rate, it's not only what's going on in Malaysia. In fact, in many instances, it's not at all about what's going on in Malaysia. It's what's going on in the other country. So in this case, it's what's going on in the United States quite often. So I always take the view that you can't really, as you mentioned, financial markets equilibrate. And we, as economists, we take the view that they are mostly in equilibrium much of the time. Most of the time, if you're lucky, they are most of the time in equilibrium. And there's very little that you can do with financial markets. So, my view is you don't really need to worry too much about those things. Let's look at, I want to look at two other issues, and then we have some other questions which I also want to look at, which are really important. One theme is about the fourth industrial revolution and a gig economy. It's really very important. And the other is the governance issue. So I think we'll leave the governance issue toward the end. But before we go on to the gig economy, because I think there was a very good lead into that, I want to talk first about health and healthcare, the health budget. Because before the election, the health minister, Khairy Jamaluddin, was emphasizing that Malaysia isn't spending enough, particularly on public health. And he was really pushing for doubling of the health budget to from about 30 billion. So he's really asking for about 30 billion in terms of healthcare, extra healthcare. Now, the health budget did increase. It increased by about 3.6 billion or something like that. But do you think that the current amount of expenditure on healthcare is sufficient, and the way in which it's spent? Do you see that there are any opportunities or gaps that we can try to address?
Well, I think as economists, first and foremost, we look at the marginal change. Is there any marginal change in the budget? Yes, as you just mentioned, there are. I think for the first time, we are seeing quite substantial budget for our health ministry. So the next question is where the money will go. So I think this is quite a technical question. It would depend on the priorities of the ministry in terms of what they think as what they see as the list of priorities they have. So what I can see is still a large chunk of it would go to to the pandemic, although we are no more under the pandemic, but it's still causing us a lot of concern. So a large chunk of it will go to that, and other aspects like, for example, various services like or those cancer treatment or tests related to that. And so I would leave that to the expertise of the health ministry in terms of the priorities of where the money should be channeled to. So as economists, I would be happy to see such an increase, such a marginal change in the budgetary allocation to our health ministry. Yeah.
Yes, and I think that we often forget in Malaysia that whatever is presented in terms of public health is almost matched, not quite now, because there was a change during the COVID period, but immediately before the COVID period, the amount of money spent in the public system was almost the same as the amount that's spent in private medicines or private healthcare. Now it's changed a little bit since then because there was a very big injection due to COVID. But we often overlook that, the amount that is spent in private health. And it is substantial. I mean, it was, as I mentioned before, almost half of total Malaysian healthcare expenditure was private. Now it's probably between 40 and 50% of it. And another aspect of that, which is really quite interesting that people often overlook, is that when people go to the private sector, often when they go to the private sector, we often have in our mind, we have big private hospitals, expensive private hospitals in nice hotels, hospitals that look like hotels. But actually, that's really not where most of the private healthcare facilities are. The private healthcare facilities are in polyclinics and general practice, and also in dentistry and these small cottage hospitals that we have around the country, very many around the country. But even here in KL, I have cottage hospital just here in Sungai Long. So there is a very great deal of money which is spent on these very small operations. And what people often forget is it's not funded by insurance, it's funded out of pocket. So in terms of the total private expenditures on health, only 15% is funded from insurance and 85% is out of pocket spending. And then when we look at the public, if we add in the public spending, so we work all of that out, private health insurance only covers about 5 or 6% of total health expenditures. And actually, by far the greatest amount of money that is, by far the greatest amount of money that's being spent in the private system is coming out of pocket. And either what that means is that people pay themselves. It can be a consultancy fee when you go to the polyclinic, 50 ringgit, and then you have to buy the medicine, it will be another 20, 30 ringgit. Or they will pay it and then they will reclaim it from their employer later. And as an economist, you see a point that I've made before, which is all about the health system and the health system financing from an economics perspective, is that when we include that private spending, there is a substantial amount of spending on healthcare in Malaysia. But the question is whether it is spent wisely or not, whether it is spent well in terms of its allocation between the public system and the private system. So to an extent, I agree with you when it comes to allocation on particular specialisms in the public system. They know best where is the demand and therefore where the money can be allocated. But when it comes to the private system, we have this sort of free-for-all where people go to private clinics or private hospitals, and they appear to be spending it in a very unstructured way. Do you think that there is some benefit for us to look at the whole system of public-private funding in healthcare and then view the total amount together? Because then you would actually get to, Kyrie is looking at 60 billion. You would actually get toward that number of 50 or 60 billion if you included the private spending.
Well, Prof. Geoffrey, I think this would need for us to go back to the concepts of healthcare, particularly the public healthcare and private healthcare. So we may not want to see a kind of dichotomy there. Yeah, I think it's high time that we look at it, in one go. Both public and private healthcare, they will need to be seen as one synergic system. So this needs some changes in the way we think of healthcare in terms of policies, particularly. So whether or not we have that policy yet, I think it's not clear yet. But personally, as economists, I like to see a synergy between both public and private healthcare, so that it will be more efficient, in terms of the cost of treatment. Because you talk about healthcare, which is in the end, it goes back to the to the public at large, and eventually it will benefit the country at large. And
well, I think part of the observation that economists will make, and I remember when I was a student, they might, in the first week of university, we were taught about the public and private healthcare, and obviously I'm from the United Kingdom. And so they were very much in favor of the National Health Service and the public provision of this. But it was a time when they were trying to introduce more private elements into the National Health Service. But you see, economists know these things. I mean, earlier you were mentioning behavioral change and behavioral impact of government policy. And I think healthcare is a very important area where these issues are crucial, because there's also the efficiency issue. which is if you're buying medicines from the private sector commercially, they're clearly going to be more expensive than if you buy it through the public system, which have a mass economy of scale, a big economy of scale in purchase of medicines and pharmaceuticals and so on. So that type of coordination is also quite interesting. There's nothing, for example, to stop private hospitals providing services which are paid for by the government, not paid for by the patient. And then the government can actually regulate the costs more effectively in that type of system. But sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something else about
it's actually quite a wide debate on the economics of healthcare. We haven't talked about the role of the insurance industry, which is, to me, is the issue of moral hazard comes in there. So we tend to disregard, we tend to stay quiet when we talk about that moral hazard aspect of our healthcare industry. So this again would need to be addressed via policies. We need to have the right policies given the current developments. We may versus private healthcare, where in the end is about public resources, whether or not they're being paid by patient directly or via insurance or government subsidies. In the end, health is about the prosperity of the country at large. So there must be a clear reform policy with respect to healthcare. So I may just mention here, piecemeal basis, because it is in light of, the budget, which is not to do with policy issues there. Nevertheless, as I see, the allocated budget mainly goes to routines, medicines, buildings, hospital facilities, new ones, clinics, and so on. And the additional ones, I think, would still a large chunk of it goes to, I mentioned earlier about some aspect of a specific tests for certain diseases like cancer, and as well as for the endemic post COVID-19 pandemic, which is still causing a lot of concern, and a large chunk of the increases would be channeled towards that. But the routine ones will be the routine things, medicine, of course, and facilities.
Well, I mean,
that's what I say.
Yes, exactly. I think there was clearly an allocation for maintenance of buildings, and having been to many public hospitals, particularly those outside of Kuala Lumpur, but also actually inside Kuala Lumpur. I mean, if you go to HKL, for example, some of the facilities are shocking. I mean, they're very, very under-maintained. But if you go outside of Malaysia, sorry, not outside of Malaysia, if you go outside of Kuala Lumpur, some of the kampung and more remote villages, the clinics and the hospitals are very under-maintained. And I think that's part of this increase in budget is going on maintenance of buildings. But there is then also this issue of the payment for doctors and nurses and other clinical staff, because we have seen a big concern about not just the recruitment of contract doctors, but also their salaries, and also the terms and conditions of their employment and the working environment. And all of that appears to me to be related to financing, particularly, of course, salaries and contracts, taking on contract doctors.
Contract is very much related to policy issue.
Yes.
Yeah, as that somewhat has been, the one carried forward from the days of the PH government.
Because clearly there is a demand. I mean, this is the point, isn't it? There is clearly a demand for medical practitioners. And then the question is, well, there is also a supply of medical practitioners, but is there the
oversupply?
Funding? And then, yes, there is an oversupply actually. But then the question is there the funding to recruit them? And then what are the terms and conditions on which they're going to be recruited? So it appears to me that there is a great deal going on in healthcare that needs to be looked at. Of course, we do have the healthcare white paper coming up. So perhaps they will be waiting for that discussion there. But I think it's clear that whatever was promised for health, or whatever was hoped for the health budget from Khairi Jamaluddin. He didn't appear to get it, so he got part of it, but he got, as you mentioned, there is a marginal increase, which is actually quite big. It's a 12% increase, but he did get an increase in his budget, but he didn't get close to the 30 billion that he wanted. Let's look at something else which might be of interest to both of us, which is education, and particularly higher education, because this was another very big area. I mean, education is the biggest chunk of government's expenditure. What was your take on the education budget, but and particularly on higher education? I have to admit, I know very little about about education outside of higher education. I really only know about higher education. So if you can give us some insights into your views on education generally, but particularly outside of the higher education. Did you think that that was a generous allocation?
Well, I think education, we have been consistently been generous enough to the ministry, sure, for many good reasons. And not only we know that education expenditure would lead to the highest multiplier effect in the economy, but there are many other considerations, political economics as well, not just the economics of it. Well, my take, given the current developments where we see that our economy is not being able to absorb the number of jobs that we would like to expect, given the structure of our economy where we really go for the routines, quote unquote routines, where relatively few greenfield, I mean new initiative, new investment, new projects, normally due to FDIs. Now that's not really happening, meaning that the large chunk of our labor force would need to be channeled to a different area, unconventional area, which is the skills development aspect, the area that requires technical skills. Although we are talking about the graduates here, tertiary level labor force, but I would think a large chunk of it would need to be rechanneled towards building capacity in terms of skills, which normally are fulfilled by lower level graduates like technical schools or skills development centers or vocational schools. Yeah. But apparently, given the current situation where greenfields are not really coming, which will lead to new job creation, then this area where it would require more technical skills will be, I think, the most possible area to channel our tertiary level graduates or labor force. And this is where adequate budget must be given to such training, to skills training for our graduates, not just for our graduates of technical schools, but for university graduates, and which is still lacking, I suppose. And a lot of training is still dedicated towards the tertiary level kind of skills, which actually the economy doesn't need very much of them. There's only such numbers that our economy would require. So again,
and what about education in terms of focusing on the new economy, the fourth industrial revolution, the gig economy, opportunities outside of more traditional types of employment? Because we saw recently that very many people leaving school were not interested in going into higher education because they felt that there were better opportunities in the gig economy. Do you think that we need to address that issue, and how do you think we can do that?
Gig economy is taking its level already, it's slowly taking its level, and we are seeing a quite substantial development with respect to that. And I would think, yes, we should explore, we should provide incentive towards that. But again, there is always a limit in anything. We can only have so much for the gig economy, especially when the structure of our economy is still very much traditional. I remember when we talked about the K economy many years back, we talk about, wow, this kind of technical knowledge, ICT based and so on. But our economy remains commodity based, and only we only require so much of expertise with respect to our resource based economy. Yet we talk about a different kind of economy, which is very much beyond the traditional resource based economy. But we haven't got that yet. So this is, the issue, the dilemma that we are facing. We may need time in order to spur the new kind of economy beyond our resource-based economy. For example, the gig economy is slowly moving up, and there are many areas mainly related to the services sector. But yet, we only can have so much of that, and we have a huge graduate level labor force out there. And our economy really need to move on and diversify beyond the resource-based economy, particularly.
So do you think that there was enough in the budget to promote high-skilled gig economy jobs? Because one of the observations is that from Ibrahim that many of the gig economy jobs tend to be low-skilled. But actually there are very many opportunities for high-skilled gig economy. Do you think that that's been incentivized sufficiently in the budget or not?
Yeah, this is what I've been saying. Still lacking in terms of skills development, skills training within the graduate level labor force. They are intelligent, yes, they have very high aptitude skills, but in terms of skills required by the economy, they still lack it. And yeah, I think this is quite lacking in the budget. Skills training for the graduate, except for certain sectors like capital markets, there is quite a mention about that. And
well, we also mentioned before that there is a lot of talent there. I mean, if we look at what, as we mentioned, MySejahtera and the COVID dashboard and the Grab and the e-commerce and all of there is quite a lot of talent there for fourth industrial revolution type work, isn't there? Do you think that there is sufficient opportunities in the budget to develop that domestically, or perhaps hand in hand to encourage foreign direct investment, big names, big companies to come and help us with that development? Do you think that those incentives were there in the budget or not?
Yeah, I like to link such issues with our reliance on foreign labor, which is still very evident in our agriculture sector, our oil palm, our rubber plantation as well. So that is the thing that characterizes our economy so far. Is still resource-based, including mining, of course. Although we like to talk about, high-level, high-order technology like E&E sector particularly, but actually it's not part of our mainstream economy. We are only a place where we are good in producing E&E, but it's not really based on homegrown capacity. Our homegrown capacity has to be directed towards our resource-based ingredients like oil palm, petroleum. I mean mining sector as well as rubber. There are elements within that sector whereby technology is needed. Technology that would make us less reliant on foreign labor. I recall there is one mention in the budget on the higher levies for foreign labor, and that collection of levies shall be channeled towards technology or automation initiative among our plantation industry. And why not we provide adequate budget to see that homegrown technology being developed, not rely on collection from foreign labor levies or tax. And I believe this will create more jobs because it's still related to our traditional sector, resource-based sector.
Okay, let's look a little bit on that, because I did some calculations on this issue because somebody was asking me about the foreign labor issue. And according to the Human Resources Ministry, there are about 840,000 people who are already gone through the process to come in although there's some reason why they're not coming, but nonetheless, they've gone through this process. Now, the fee to the immigration ministry or the immigration department to deal with that is about 8,000 ringgit per person. But then if you add in agency fees, it can be twice that. And some people say it can be as much as 20,000. So if you do a very quick calculation, just the immigration department costs are about 17 billion ringgit just to recruit these foreign workers, because you were mentioning the foreign, reliance on foreign workers. And the cost of that is that much, 17 billion. And then if you include agency fees, it could go anywhere between 33 and 44 billion. 33 and 44 billion ringgit just to recruit them. And so, the question arises as economists, do we feel that we should be spending this amount of money just on the transactions costs of hiring foreign workers? Because it is literally that. If you go to the immigration department and ask, how much does it cost me to bring a foreign worker? It's roughly a little bit less than 8,000. And if you multiply that by 840,000 people, you can get to that number. It's billions, tens of billions. Don't you think that that's just far too much for us to be spending? Imagine if that tens of billions was spent on what you mentioned, training, research and development, homegrown technologies.
Yeah, there is an issue of firm level decision and economy-wide implication. For firm level decision, they are normally guided by least cost inputs. In the context of labor, they would prefer to utilize foreign labor because it's going to be less costly. It's going to be more profitable for them as compared to using domestic labor, which may require higher wages and which may not be equally productive as well. So from firm level decision making, I think it's rational that they would prefer the use of foreign labor. That's why the lobby is very strong there.
Well, the lobby is very strong, and the average salaries for foreign workers are about half of the average salaries for Malaysia. So in terms of the marginal monthly cost, then that's correct. And of course, another issue is foreign workers are easier to hire and fire because they don't have legal protection. If there's any industrial dispute, they will simply be fired and deported. So they do have that. But don't you think that it's exactly that type of thing, the low wages and the absence of legal protection, that caused the Indonesian labor ban in the first place? And then as a consequence of that, tens of billions have been lost in plantations, construction, manufacturing, retail, tourism, because of this failure of, this, we always say the reliance on foreign workers, but actually it's the abuse of foreign workers, isn't it? They're paid half of what Malaysians are paid, and they are treated in a hire and fire mentality with no real labor.
I think the way we are treating foreign labor is becoming a lot better now. Of late, I've noted such improvement. But nevertheless, it still relies on foreign labor, and that has been entrenched ever since the day of our colonial government, whereby our agriculture model is very much reliance on foreign labor. Anyway, it's very important that the government provide sufficient carrot and stick in order to motivate, in order to spur our industry to utilize more domestic workers. I think that kind of provision in the 2023 budget is consistent with that kind of incentive in order to see less reliance of foreign labor. But we need to explore the bigger picture more seriously now. I think it's time that we be better to face the pains of using less foreign labor by seeing increases in labor costs among plantation. I believe, from my observation, from my field observation, if we could, for example, increase the minimum wage of 1,005 by 50%, this would really draw in substantial domestic workers. Yes. I've seen many domestic workers our own people very ready to work in the plantation, given
Yes.
some little bit more incentive from the
Yes.
plantation in terms of welfare, as well as maybe 50% more of 1,005. I think that will be sufficient to induce domestic workers. But this, the government will need to have a very strong political will, and we must be ready to feel some element of pains there, because economists believe that there must be pains before we can see reforms taking place. So in any case, the value added in the plantation sector has been low for a very long time. I think about
you see, part of that issue is that if you look at the costs, and if you say it costs you a minimum of 8,000, it could cost you 16 or even 20,000. If you just took those costs and instead of wasting it on the transaction of recruitment of a foreign worker, the transaction costs and the corruption, frankly, the corruption and all of that's going on, if you just stopped that and, as you mentioned, raised the salaries, you would get domestic workers, domestic people who are coming, and they come, as you mentioned, for the opportunities that you get on plantation townships. I mean, they have schools, they have clinics, they have infrastructure, and so they get free housing. So if you raise the salary instead of wasting it on the transaction costs and the middlemen, it is, from an economics perspective, perfectly feasible to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, I was a planter before, actually. So I know the industry quite well. I've been in Sabah, I've been down the state, and I can see many local people are willing to work in the plantation.
Yes, they are willing to work.
We tend to use,
if they get the salary, right?
We tend to use that our domestic people are reluctant. I think that's a pretext. So the government need to go in very seriously and impose some pains that will work. But in the long run, we will see improvement in terms of mechanization, in terms of the use of technology and so on. This is where I think a large chunk of our tertiary level labor force will come in terms of the K economy, in terms of providing the necessary skills, not through manual inputs though, but through their intellectual capacity. The gig economy, so-called.
We're coming to the end, but before we do, I just want to ask you about the elephant in the room, really, which is subsidies. So we've been living on subsidies for the last 2 years, and we know that the total subsidy bill has been as much as 77 billion or even close to 80 billion. And it's estimated it will be less next year. It'll be about 42 billion. But something that caught my eye was first that the government is giving e-wallets with 100 ringgit to the M40. And I don't know why they need an e-wallet with 100 ringgit. But another is that they're giving to young people an e-wallet with 200 ringgit. And it occurred to me that the only reason they're doing this is to get people to use e-wallets so that they can transfer these subsidies and target these subsidies through the e-wallet system. Do you think that that's a good way of targeting subsidies?
Well, again, back to the conceptual issue on subsidies, which is a long debate. But, as economists, we don't really in favor of subsidies unless in certain situations. Not entirely we are against subsidies though, but only certain situations we do really advocate subsidies. Not in many situations though. Anyway, we are seeing a lot more subsidies being offered in the new budget. There's a lot to talk about it, but anyway, the blessing is that we could use that as one of the bases in order to remove some subsidies, like fuel subsidies, perhaps in the coming years, and that will imply increasing government revenue, and we may recycle that again to the economy to help the B40s particularly, and then the subsidies also may be a good justification for GST implementation. And if we want to sustain that, then certainly we need to be able to sustain the source of revenue. We can do just business as usual in the context of government revenue. So GST, we need to go along hand in hand with the kind of subsidies we are offering. So I'm a quite pragmatic economist, though. Although
yes, well, I mean,
yeah.
I am also very pragmatic about it. And my view has been that the subsidies have been essential in the short term to keep prices down. But as you mentioned, economists don't like subsidies in the long term. So we do need to find a way of moving away from the subsidies. But my real concern is that if you have targeted subsidies focused on particular products in particular shops using a particular e-wallet scheme, there is huge transaction costs. It's a bit like the foreign workers. There's a huge transaction cost because every time you use an e-wallet, you have to pay between 0.5% or 3% on the transaction. And also, there's a lot of corruption in getting your product on the list of subsidized products or getting it through your shop rather than someone else's shop, or using your e-wallet than using somebody else's e-wallet. And I wrote, not a long article, but I wrote quite a short article on this, but I hopefully make the point, which is from an economics perspective, this is quite the most stupid way of targeting subsidies. And a much better way is direct cash transfer. You give the money directly to people in their bank account through BKM, for example, and let them spend it as they choose. You could even increase the BKM, for example. Which do you prefer? Targeted subsidies through e-wallets or cash transfers through BKM?
E-wallet may be meaningful in the context of spurring the digital economy, creating awareness and being familiar with it. But I agree with you in the context of targeted subsidy, it wouldn't be e-wallet as the right approach. I still believe the so-called like the food coupon system, the way the U.S. government administers that. Many years ago, I was a student there. I was also a recipient of it. So I believe in that kind of approach, this primitive, the so-called prehistoric approach, whereby you really target, you have the targeted growth and you provide direct cash transfer. And as you said, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Because then they can spend on what they wish. That's my view. I mean, my view is...
that's one. Also, although it's quite debatable in terms of enhancing consumption that goes to GDP, yes, it's good. But in terms of whether or not they are spending on the targeted things, then that is quite debatable. So,
yes. Also, the transactions costs are lower. I mean, if you transfer it through your bank, it's much lower. Anyway,
gentlemen,
we will continue this debate because this will be a debate for the election rather than the debate for the budget. And perhaps so the question will be whether this budget will be retabled as it is now, or whether it will be retabled with changes depending on who wins the next election, or whether we will have a completely new budget. But thank you very much, Prof. Jamal, for the discussion. I think we covered a lot, and I hope. Thank you for the questions, and I hope that we covered all of the questions one way or another from the Q&A. And so I hand back to Mariam for the wind up. Thank you very much, Prof, again, for everything, for the contributions.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jeffrey.
All right, thank you so much, professors. And it is timely indeed. Very big thanks to all the participants, and of course to our distinguished speaker and moderator who have made this webinar possible. So just kindly before we end, we want to take a group picture with all of us together. So I invite all participants to switch on their cameras so that we can have a group picture together, post it on our social media. Participants, I kindly invite for you to switch on the cameras. Right. Right. Okay, so perhaps we have like more shy people than expected. Don't worry about that. All right, so okay, a moment. All right. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. Okay. Thank you so much to panel speakers and to all the participants. I believe all of us are gaining a lot of valuable knowledge today, especially towards the end when the conversation was picking up. But indeed, as Professor Joffrey said, this should be like debated on the table for the next budget. On behalf of Institute Masa, once again, I thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedules to join this webinar. Remember to follow us on Instagram at Institute Masa to get more updates regarding upcoming events. See you soon in any future. But again, thank you all very much for making this event a success. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.